All right, welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And Dr. Lisa, how are all the things? All the things.
All the things. Well, that's a big question to answer in the intro to the podcast. Um, it's cooler here, so that's a good thing, but I think it's going to rise again. Europe is on fire, and one of my
Mm.
dogs ate a piece of roadkill this morning. So,
Oh no.
yeah, it was quite the fight to get it out of his mouth, and I did not succeed entirely.
Gosh, was this comment?
No, Bowser.
Bowser. Oh gosh. Yeah, that I get the heebie-jeebies just hearing that right now. So yes. Yeah.
I almost vomited like because I had to touch it to pull it out of his mouth and just seeing him eat it. I mean, I felt nauseous, like I was going to throw up right there on the street.
And you would have been justified in doing it. Absolutely.
Mm,
Oh, that's terrible. That's bad.
yeah.
That's bad. That's bad.
Uh-huh.
Oh goodness. Look, we the name of this episode going to be Roadkill. I hope not, but here we are. Okay. Here we are. Here we are. All right, y'all. Well, yes, we're back for another episode of the Unfazed Unedited podcast. And we got some good stuff that we want to revisit, actually. So let's get into the word of the week. All right. So many moons ago, back when we were in the 100s of episodes, 139, we did an episode entitled Wake Up and Stay Woke. And it's been long enough now, Lisa, that we probably need to
hmm
revisit that word anyway, because we know,
Yeah.
and especially with linguistics that are describing people's lived experiences in real time, words evolve, obviously, they
Yeah.
evolve.
Yeah.
And so we're going to revisit woke really quickly, but we just want to remind you to go back to episode 139 and you can really hear where we laid the groundwork for that. Matter of fact, Lisa, I'll drop the link to that episode in the show notes for this week's episode. But let me take you back just a little bit. The word woke is not new. So for those that, like myself, love to listen to music, love to listen to all types of genres and so forth, it's not new in politics, it's not new in music, it's
hmm
not new in any of those particular areas. We can go all the way back to track the word woke back to the 1920s. And this word woke transformed from a literal past tense verb now into a localized African American idiom, and then it changed into a global civil rights rallying cry to bring people together. And now, of course, Lisa, we know that it has consistently been weaponized as a political pejorative word. And so, with
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
we can at least trace the literary tree of this term back to 1923, where Marcus Garvey used the phrase "Wake up Ethiopia, wake up Africa," which was this call for global Black and social political awareness. And we can track that back to records that the NAACP has. But we also can talk about, for example, in the previous episode we did, the 1938 song Scottsboro Boys. That was written and recorded by the blues musician Leadbelly. And they talked about this specifically where they were warning Black travelers in the American
Mm.
South best to, quote, stay woke to
Yeah.
avoid racial violence. Now, I know this to be
Yeah.
true because we have a track record of the Green Book, for example. I discovered a Green Book in my
hmm
grandparents' home many moons ago. That was a book to tell us where to go and where not to go. But wherever you go, it's, quote, best to stay woke, right? And so then we fast forward through lots of different points of the word evolving. In the 1940s, it was used by a union leader in West Virginia where they said, we will stay woke from now on.
hmm
They were talking about discriminatory pay. The Harlem writer William Melvin Kelly talked about woke in an essay in the New York Times entitled "If You're Woke, You Dig It," meaning that it was the first time that the word was in just mainstream print rather than just
Mm.
in Black circles or Black political movements. Even Dr. King, which I did not know this, even Dr. King in 1965 delivered a commencement address at Oberlin. And he specifically told students, quote, there's nothing more tragic than to sleep through a revolution, remain awake, right? And so
Mm,
we could go on and on with that trajectory. I mean, even one of my favorite songstresses, Erica Badu, talked about it in her song Master Teacher, talking about I stay woke. And so with that, what's frustrating, Lisa, is that you know how this goes.
mm,
2020, 2022, in the wake of George Floyd, and then moving forward, Florida passes the Stop WOKE Act,
hmm.
legally weaponizing the term to restrict how race, gender, and all types of US history
Right.
can be taught in schools and workplaces. And of course, we know, yeah, the person that's inhabiting the White House uses the term in a very pejorative way along with his followers. And
Yeah.
so, with that, Lisa, I think now there's going to be some nuances that we need to update people with that may not have been the same back with episode 139. So I'll leave that there.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, we got some updates to go here. So listen in, y'all, but we're giving you a little bit of homework. Go back to 139 and listen in and just add it to this conversation. All right. All right, Dr. Lisa, let's get into phase one. All right, Dr. Lisa, sometimes you put me on the spot with certain situations that you want me to respond to without having done a
Okay.
lot of thinking. So this is one of those, right? I'm getting you back on this, which is going to be so good.
Okay.
But let me tell y'all about this dichotomy here between what I've called corporate DEI and nonprofit DEI, right? And Dr. Lisa and I, we work with lots of nonprofit organizations. We have a history of working with nonprofit organizations in the past, both together and separately. And I'm picking up on something that I was like, shoot, I need to bring that to Lisa because I want to make sure that I'm not going off track here with my thoughts around this. But I heard a senior leader of a nonprofit who came over from corporate, an entire career in corporate, the majority of it in corporate finance, a data lover like yourself, Lisa, and came over from corporate into nonprofit. And, they're getting settled, getting acclimated a bit. Only been in the nonprofit realm now for maybe 18 months at best. And I'm working with this individual as well as other senior leaders, their board members, and so forth. And this individual said, and I'm trying to keep this as anonymous as possible, the individual
Hmm.
said, I appreciate DEI work. I want to continue to
Hmm.
do DEI work. I think it's important. I've been through so many DEI trainings. So it's not that I'm anti DEI, but why does DEI have to take over every conversation? I mean,
Mm.
if I want apples, as an example, just give me apples. Why do I have to have a full blown DEI conversation when I just want an apple, right? As kind
Hmm.
of this
Hmm.
flippant example of why does the DEI conversation have to overlap so much with the work of the nonprofit?
Right.
Now, I did have a response because I've seen this before, but I haven't seen it as loud before
Mm.
in a nonprofit. And so, Lisa, what thoughts run through your mind? I'll tell you what I told them, but I'm interested to hear what thoughts run through your mind as you hear that kind of transition, or I don't even know if there's a bridge between corporate DEI and nonprofit DEI, but what are your first thoughts when you hear that?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I don't think that nonprofits do it right all the time, or I mean, I think there's a lot of virtue signaling and
Mm,
um just, language, but the actual reality is that they're not really thinking about inclusion. What first popped into my head when you said that what this person had said was it's integrated into everything, right? Like they're still kind of taking it out in its own thing and putting it on the side. Um, like everything can be encapsulated and is in its own silo. And when I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think about it like running through everything, like it's integrated. So every conversation will always be about that, not explicitly necessarily, but it's always in there. I think if you're doing it right, you're not necessarily having to have like these carve out conversations because the whole system is engaging with it constantly.
Yes. And I think that's where the rub comes in, is that if you've been stellar in previous work that you've done in a completely different setting that was very comfortable with the appendage of DEI versus the integration of DEI, it will feel almost like what did I call it? I think I explained it as either a culture shock or kind of a whiplash effect, where it's like, wait a minute, why are we talking about it so much? Whereas other senior leaders that are working along with this individual are like, no, we're actually not talking about it enough for our preference. But relatively, if you go from one-offs from time to time, a couple of celebratory events and a couple of compliance trainings, talking about it in an integrated way probably does feel like whiplash for an individual that hasn't been required to do so. And so when the
Yeah.
individual brought up, hey, I mean, if I want apples, just give me apples. Of course, I had to have the right tone of delivery because I want the person to receive the message, not become defensive to the message. But my response to give an example, a very tangible example, when the person said, if I want apples, just give me apples, my response was, well, absolutely, I can give you apples. And there are many
Hmm.
minority owned business certifications. So we could get your apples from a woman owned business, a minority owned business, an LGBT owned business, a veteran owned business, or an integration of any of those. So you ask
Right.
for apples, and even that, we can give you an integrated DEI lens to give you the apples that you want. Right. And it was almost like a deer in the headlights. Oh my goodness. Oh, that makes
Yeah.
sense on a
Yeah.
day-to-day to-do list process. And I've used this before, even with, many, many moons ago when I was an executive assistant. If you're asking me to order pins, then there's still a DEI lens to it because I can look at a
Right.
minority owned business. I can look at a woman owned business. Like, so even something that you think is so separate and apart from DEI isn't. And it never was actually, unless that is the culture of your organization, corporate, nonprofit, or even something else, right? So when I think about it, Lisa, and please add to my list, take away from my list, so forth. But I was trying to think about, okay, if I had to
Hmm.
give some characteristics of corporate DEI versus nonprofit DEI, especially the nonprofits that are doing it well and integrated, as you mentioned,
Right. Right.
it would probably be corporate DEI is primarily focused on compliance, state, federal, even
Hmm.
local compliance sometimes. Most of the conversations are situated in human resources conversations and pretty much no further than that.
Yeah.
Non-discrimination or any type of bias, retaliation type concerns. Exactly what you said, tangential to the work and not
Hmm.
integrated in the
Hmm.
work. And whatever the minimum requirements might be around data collection of difference and
Right.
diversity
Right.
across the organization, but it probably stops around there, right? Throw in one or two celebratory events and we're done with it, right? Versus nonprofits, depending on their level of integration or not, it's again, it's not that compliance has to fight with aspiration, but
Right.
an
Right.
organization that does it well is aspiring for more. So we can give you the compliance numbers, but we want to give you more. We can give you the DEI numbers, but we want to give you more. Um, it's usually beyond human resources. So it's about
Hmm.
programming, about whatever the main mission or function of the organization is. How does that connect with equity and inclusion? So
Yeah.
it's not just driving the car down the street, it's how do we equitably drive with accessible cars, accessible sidewalks, accessible
Right.
crosswalks. It's in that way. Um, Maximum allowed data collection so that we can further describe folks and their lived experiences in and around your organization. Um, and
Hmm.
you took the words right out of my mouth. It's just integral to the work where
Right.
you're not performing it as the work, but there's nothing that doesn't touch diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Hmm.
And I think that's kind of the big difference. And at the same time, I'm thinking to myself, "Ooh, this is going to be interesting because the senior leaders who think they've met the ceiling of DEI work through their corporate experiences are going to have a new normal with a fully integrated, or I don't want to say fully because I don't think any organization is fully integrated, but a
Right.
more integrated nonprofit DEI structure, thought pattern,
Hmm.
culture. It's going to be a huge shift for those folks that need it. But we'll do the training and get it done. But it's very interesting to watch what they thought they knew versus a new normal when it comes to that
Hmm.
Venn diagram of integration there.
Yeah, and I think when an organization, corporate or nonprofit, is doing it well,
Mm-hmm.
you're not necessarily using the terms directly, right? Diversity,
That's
equity,
right.
and
That's
inclusion.
right.
Like there
That's right.
isn't the need to have a 1 hour training outside of what is legally required for sexual harassment or whatever. That's the piece is if we all thought more inclusively, then the kind of call outs wouldn't have to happen to the same degree, you know? And I don't think there's probably any organization that is at that stage where it is just happening as a matter of course. And so there's
Very
not a
rarely.
need
Yeah.
to have discussions about it.
Absolutely. There you go. Absolutely. And even when it is doing it, relatively well, there's always an area that goes untouched. So,
Hmm.
an organization that may be doing great work with race and gender may suck when it comes to accessibility and phobias and so forth. So,
Right.
um, not getting stuck in one or two things on the identity wheel, but always pushing with all of these different identities and their
Hmm.
intersections. Like there's always more work to do. I even said this in a meeting a few weeks ago. I said, this is going to sound pretty controversial here, but we're talking about race a whole hell of a lot. And that didn't mean that I didn't want to talk about race, but it was the only identity they were talking
Mm.
about. They weren't talking about any of the other intersections. And I'm like, okay, you care that you have, which I want you to care, that you have a Black Lives Matter sign in the front of your storefront, but your sidewalk is so cracked up that if somebody that is in a wheelchair or has another ability concern cannot get into your storefront.
Right.
How can we talk about both? Because guess
Yeah.
what? There are also Black folks that need to get into your storefront, right? So, kind of figuring out how to help them to think through those other intersecting lenses.
Hmm.
It's a growing edge. It's a growing edge, even for the ones that are doing it
Yeah.
well.
Yeah,
So,
and particularly in this climate, right, where
ugh,
you talked in the word of the week about how woke has been transformed into this pejorative term, and that is also true for the acronym DEI, right? And
absolutely.
so we've talked about this, at the beginning of probably mid 2025, all those companies that kind of reneged on their promises, corporate companies that reneged on
Yes.
their promises around diversity, equity, and inclusion. There were some that have stayed the course and, are doing just fine. And so I think in that sense, another one for your corporate DEI list maybe is easy to let go, right?
Ooh.
Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because there are many
Good one.
nonprofits that receive federal funding, and the federal funding, as we've talked about here, is their life. And if they don't receive the federal funding, they will not exist, right? And that
Mm-hmm.
dilemma around changing the language and thinking about how you can strategically still offer services to a whole bunch of different people, but you're not saying that. And there are consequences of not saying it and weighing are the consequences of not saying it, so someone might think we're not inclusive, are they less difficult to manage than having no money and having to close our
Mm-hmm.
door, right? And I don't think corporations have that same calculation to make, right? So in that sense, I think, and this is certainly not true for all nonprofits, but I would say in my experience, nonprofits are more thoughtful and are only sidestepping DEI language because their hand is being forced. And you could
Mm-hmm.
argue that Facebook, Meta, Google, all those ones, their quote unquote hand was being forced, but I think that's bullshit, right? Like a
Mm-hmm.
mega company that is like worth billions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I think you could just say, we're staying the course, right? Versus
Mm-hmm.
this little nonprofit that, is completely reliant on federal grants. So,
Exactly. That's
yeah.
right. That's right. That's a great point. That's a great point. Whereas what I've seen with many nonprofit organizations, it's almost, the not to say that the coffers are always overflowing, but if you do one thing that upsets the people that don't like wokeness, there's always another river of people who do expect
Yeah.
wokeness, and so that
Yeah.
that $1 gets replaced with a different dollar, right? Or that that stream of income gets replaced by a different stream of income. I remember, Lisa, I think you and I talked about this on a previous podcast, where there's a theater in Baltimore that specifically was going to lose one of their federal grants because they wanted
Hmm.
to stay the course with this work, and the money that they unfortunately had to lose through the federal government, it tripled when people around the world heard that they stood their ground
Mm,
around their, because equity and inclusion is central to their mission. If you
yeah.
remove it, it's like saying we're a plumbing company that doesn't do plumbing. So,
Yeah.
it's like almost impossible to remove it without shutting the whole thing down. Not only did they meet their fundraising goals, but I think it was like triple what their
Mm,
fundraising goals were to replace that funding. And so whenever organizations start to lose their courage around that, I tell that story, but there's many other stories like that where trust and believe, that money will replace itself with other people that feel strongly. It is divisive, and that's okay, but that
yeah.
doesn't mean that the faucet stops running just because you're going to stand. Because here's the thing: the people who are already giving may look at you and say, "Oh, you're not standing your ground on equity and inclusion, then we're going to turn our money off because of that." So either way, if you're going to align with the side that you actually believe with, so you can get the fund
Right.
people who believe in that very stance, because they're going to support you with money, with time, with coming to the theater itself. I just I always remind folks that lose their courage that all is not lost, and I think you will be very surprised from a philanthropic perspective.
Yeah, I do think that that's true to an extent, but with the thousands of nonprofits that are struggling, I don't think all of them can be saved by that.
Oh no,
Particularly
definitely.
nonprofits
Yeah,
that are dealing with
agreed.
issues such as LGBT rights,
Mm-hmm.
sex assault, domestic
Mm-hmm.
violence, all these things that kind of,
Yeah,
poverty. I think that's going to be true in some cases, but
housing.
if your
Yeah.
entire operating budget is a federal grant and that federal grant goes away, then that's it, you're done.
Oh, for
Um,
sure. Absolutely. Oh,
yeah.
I 100% would agree with that. And that's what's the saying? For all different types of business, you build for rain during the sunshine, meaning that
Mm,
as much as I hate that, nonprofits do get wiped out, but also we have to think about how do we diversify, because I've seen for profit and nonprofit get wiped out because 99.9999% of their funding comes from either federal or state grants or just general business funding, that once they don't believe in your political stance, of course they can pull the rug right out from under you. And so the way to cope with that is to diversify the streams of income if possible. And even when you do, sometimes 50 to 60% of your funding still may come from Fed state.
yeah.
How do
Hmm.
you cushion oneself? And that's a whole financial conversation to be had that
Yeah.
isn't always easy,
Or possible.
especially
Yeah.
for
I mean,
nonprofits. Exactly. Exactly.
and then, yeah, so I
Exactly.
think that
Mm-hmm.
it's a much more complicated situation for nonprofits when they think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. But a big old corporate company, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying that contracts aren't on the line for Google or Meta or whatever, but you have a much bigger cushion, right?
Oh, for
Like,
sure. Yes,
you
yes,
know,
yes.
and you're just letting it
Absolutely.
go because it's about you want to, you don't want to lose profit, and it just feels different to me. So I think that that's a huge piece of this too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And we know the landscape of nonprofit organizations is extremely diverse within the diversity. I mean,
Yeah.
If the one grant that you're getting is covering the executive director's salary and one executive assistant, and there are no other staff, and we're a
Yeah.
volunteer run organization, hello, it's already fragile. Important work,
Yeah.
but still financially fragile. So, yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely. So, just wanted to bat that around a little bit because I realized that, yes, it's two different animals here. And how do you help
Hmm.
someone who's doing great work to do great work in a different context? And so I'm still grappling with how to help and support. So look, y'all, if you're listening to this podcast and you got ideas for me, send them my way. Send them my way. I will certainly use them. So, all right, got us into phase two.
Okay, so we're going to talk about woke 1.0 versus woke 2.0. Um, this is interesting. I have some mixed feelings about all of this. So maybe we can talk and get some clarity over it. But about a week ago, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Congresswoman from New York, she was on ABC's This Week, and she said woke one was crazy. Now, I don't, she was quoting a council member who had said something like this, I guess, on Twitter or something. And it kind of created an interesting dynamic because AOC emerged in the time frame of quote unquote woke one, right? Or 1.0. So to have her articulate that, I think shows this growth in the Democratic Party, but also the part that I'm conflicted about is okay, I think let me say more and then I'll get to my point because I was like, I think I need to say a little bit more. So, Woke 1.0 was around 2018, 2019, 2020, 21, 22. So it incorporates the Me Too movement, George Floyd's murder, Breonna Taylor, um, Ahmaud Arbery, or, and many others, right? So, and then um, a lot of what is termed cancel culture. So like a person, a comedian, it happened to a lot of comedians, had said something dumb and stupid and hurtful like 19 years ago. And then that became a big issue. And so they were quote unquote canceled, right? So the other term that is used to describe this woke 1.0 is peak woke, right? When the left in particular got so rigid and dogmatic about language behavior that the end result was this massive backlash that we've seen, right? Because it didn't resonate with a lot of people, and millions of people felt judged for good or for bad, right? Whatever we think about that. And so that has hurt the Democratic Party. So, oh, and also I should say defund the police was around this time too. And that was not popular, right? Um, so woke 2.0 is defined as being now, and it is more about class, so it's more about economic populism and responding to the needs of the moment. And that's the piece where I get hung up, where I have the conflict, because quote unquote responding to the needs of the moment, whose needs, right? So Um, so I do think to s- I have evolved around this, Shaunna. I do think there was a period of time where people who believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion, not everyone, but a good percentage of people went like overreached, right? To the point where they stopped kind of bringing people in to understand and kind of went headfirst into defensiveness because of the nature of the approach, I suppose. Um, and so I think this woke 2.0 is about moving away from that and towards this economic populism that is understood to be more universally acceptable. Because we know that economics intersects with all these other identities, right? But if you come at it from why is pay so low in these
Mm-hmm.
industries? Why do we not have paid time off? the economy sucks, rich people are getting richer, poor people are getting poorer, economic inequality is just out of control. That, right, it cuts across all these different identities. So it still gives you the opportunity to talk about disproportionate impact, but you're doing it through a back door, through a vehicle that is more resonant with a larger group of people. So I'm curious what you think about this because it's just been bubbling up over the last 2 weeks, this kind of just distancing from this woke 1.0 and in Wisconsin, Francesca Hong, Democratic Socialists of America member, was running for the governor's race, and she was narrowly beaten by a more centrist candidate, and she had some pretty left views, like even down to we should get rid of Valentine's Day, we should get rid of Thanksgiving. And I understand the origin of Thanksgiving. But if you want to gain popular support, like that is not like children are starving in the United States. Like that feels more important than whether or not we have a holiday that, um so I think the Democratic Party breathed like a collective sigh of relief because the concern was that she was just going to fulfill and embody all of those stereotypes that the Republicans and conservatives have worked so hard to create through woke and DEI. So, what are your
Yeah.
reactions to this?
Yeah. It's as you're giving me these examples, I just feel like I'm seeing the pendulum swinging. Like it always swings too far. It never
Yep.
swings exactly where it should. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And what I think is really interesting is I talk about this a lot in not just training around these particular topics, but how training is delivered, right? Lisa, you and I know we've talked about this before, where it's one thing to say, Lisa, you're a freaking racist, versus here are some options to do things differently. That I'm saying the exact same thing and it's landing differently. And
Yeah.
so with
Yeah.
that, what I think is a shame is if we continue to, because yes, I'm not saying filter down the truth. I'm not saying don't tell I'm not saying any of that. But what I am saying is remember what we want. We want change. We
Yeah.
want change behavior. We want change thought patterns. We want change perspectives. And
Mm-hmm.
none of that happens when someone physiologically and biologically are in such amygdala hijack that they can't even process what you're trying to give them because they're still trying to get
Yeah.
over you or me or whomever feeling as if it's an attack. Because remember, even though we may not perceive what we're saying as an attack, if you've never been called out on your bullshit around all the isms, it will feel like an attack to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as much as I may want to deliver this and it feels like an attack to them, what I actually want is change. I can't get
Mm-hmm.
change if it's being received as an attack, if it's
Mm-hmm.
received as amygdala hijack and all these other things. So I think it's interesting. Like even the example around Thanksgiving, you know, I've seen the shift, Lisa. This is a sneaky but good
Mm.
one. I've seen the shift around as Thanksgiving is an example. No, there are a lot of folks, including people of color, that may not even name Thanksgiving, but
Mm-hmm.
instead will say it's family time,
Yeah.
right? Now we know what we're really saying. What we're really saying is, yes, we completely reject everything that's so nasty and wrong behind the history of Thanksgiving in the United States, but we also exercise our right to spend time with family so that we can remember what is important, right? So if she goes around walking around saying we're going to cancel Thanksgiving, people hear that as family time. People hear that as slowing down. They don't hear it as let's sit around and talk about Columbusing the whole world. That's not what they're hearing. So are you here to
Mm.
piss people off, or are you here to get people to change perspective?
Right.
And now there's some people that are going to be offended no matter what you say. I mean, that's just the truth of the matter. But what is she aiming for as the end goal? If the end goal is change, what's the delivery? What's the delivery?
Yeah.
That's what I'm asking. And I don't know if she knows that yet, but what's the delivery?
I mean, she might. A moderate, I think his name's David Crowley, African American man,
Mm-hmm.
had
Mm-hmm.
left the race and then came back in the race and got all this money and support. And I think he beat her by like 1% or something. Um,
Uh-huh.
but it kind of goes back to our discussion that we had a few podcasts ago when I was raising the question about pragmatically moving to the center, more people live in the center, right?
That's right. That's right. Mm-hmm.
So if you
Mm-hmm.
want to,
Mm-hmm.
you know, gain power back from these cruel and inhuman politicians, you
Mm-hmm.
have to be practical. But the consequence of that practicality is that there are folks who are routinely ignored who could then just get ignored some more, right? So I don't know what the balance
Mm-hmm.
is, but I think we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing that in Wisconsin and then obviously in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Al Sayed, I'm forgetting his first name, but
Mm-hmm.
he was elected also very not elected, sorry, won the primary very narrowly, but he has doesn't have as quote unquote extreme positions as this Francesca Hong had, I guess. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't so so I think I see the woke 1.0 and the woke 2.0 discussion, as you said,
Mm-hmm.
like a pendulum, and I think it's engaging with that issue around pragmatism and how do we still address, this wild inequity in this country, but in a way that is more inclusive, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
It it kind of reminds me too of let me just be very clear on this, y'all. I'm like, as much as I love Maryland and my state and everything we do here, everybody that probably is listening to this podcast would love to have a Mamdani-ish mayor in their world.
yeah.
Like right now, I mean, he's doing it. And what's interesting about that, and I don't know if it would fall under this category of woke 2.0, but it might, is that let me give you my bias and my recency bias on something that he just did.
Okay.
So just this week, he announced a couple of different initiatives that he's doing, but he's been practicing both his Spanish and his Mandarin to
Mm,
speak to the citizens of New York in their native tongue to share with them the good news of some of these programs for kids and free theater
hmm.
tickets for high school kids and that type of thing. And I'm thinking to myself, this man didn't necessarily just wake up and say, hey, y'all, every mayor prior to me was a freaking racist, sexist, all these
Right,
different
right.
things. He just woke up and started doing the thing. And
Yeah.
so you've got people in the comments that don't know one syllable of Mandarin, but the fact that they recognize that he's
Hmm.
breaking down barriers and trying to reach his people, the New Yorkers, as easily, quickly, and authentically as possible says something.
Hmm.
And so with that, it still feels like that, getting it closer to where it needs to be in that pendulum swing of he's doing it without it necessarily being offensive, right? Like I'm still scrolling and waiting on that ignorant ass person that's going to be like, speak American in the comments, because
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
would be a very racist sentiment that somebody is thinking,
Hmm.
right? That would be the case if he said, hey, y'all need to speak in more different languages. You need to have the drop down list of, 50 plus languages that are spoken in the city of New York on the web. He didn't amygdala hijack people. He just did it.
Right.
He just
Hmm.
embodied, instead of saying these folks are racist, he simply embodies and models anti-racism, inclusion, and equity. And
Hmm.
so my concern is that will woke 2.0, and Lisa, you know how this goes, we might be around long enough to see a woke 3.0. What will
Right.
that look like in such a way that we're no longer hijacking people that might be ready to embody some of these characteristics, but because you've offended them so deeply, you've literally taken away their ability to do so in certain ways
Mm.
because they're so busy trying to get over the offense that they can't do the actual work that we're practically begging them to do.
Yeah. And I think that's the damage that was done, you know. And
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
it's not that I disagree with the sentiment of,
Exactly.
the early 2020s.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
was probably one of those people that policed language and dismissed individuals who said used the wrong word, right? And I have definitely backed off of that in a way that's not really that helpful. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
I think Mom Danny is a really good illustration of still having those values that one might put under the umbrella of woke, but enacting them,
Yeah, yeah.
um,
That's
like
right.
you said, embodying them rather than just talking about them. Like is demonstrating this isn't this
Hmm.
wild and radical extreme thing, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Exactly. So, so for example, here's one more recency bias example. There was a gentleman, visually I may be wrong, but he looked like a gentleman of color that did a video. Mamdani is being known now for people doing videos of something that needs the attention of the city, and he's responding quite quickly, whether it's a
Mm,
pothole or whatever it is. And this gentleman of color did a video in his neighborhood where there's a large tree in front of a number of homes of elderly folks. And beside that tree, there's clearly a sinkhole that's not car size, maybe half a car size, that's right there next to the tree. You can even see the roots coming out
mm,
in the sinkhole. And this gentleman did a whole video around, hey, I'm just trying to show you how dangerous this is. Kids are riding their scooters around here, elderly folks trying to get in and out of their cars, or delivery, coming to bring them
hmm.
something. Now, this man didn't say the city of New York is racist and ageist and all these other things because you won't come and fix a pothole. What he did was bring attention to a pothole that happens to affect elderly folks, young people on bikes, scooters, etc., in an area that's mostly non-white. Again,
Hmm.
embodying the work
Yeah,
rather
yeah.
than getting all the language right, or getting,
Hmm.
and to me, I'm like, that feels better to me because I think I told y'all this story, this just a brief one, where someone asked Serena Williams, well, what do you do when people talk shit about you, people talk shit about your body, they, say that you're not really all that you're cracked up to be, you're not the goat, et
Hmm.
cetera, so forth. What do you say to those people? She didn't say, I tell them they're full of shit. I tell them she said, I surround myself with people who believe in me,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
She's saying the exact same thing. She's not saying I go cuss out everybody that doesn't support me. She said, instead of amygdala hijack of cussing people out or being frustrated or giving them more attention, she said, no, I'm focusing my attention on the people that are good and the work that is good and the vibe that I need around me to help me to be successful
Hmm.
as an elite athlete. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, she got that right. She got that really right, because I too love language, Lisa. I too love getting the words
Hmm.
right, the data right, the information right. And at the same time, we do have to evolve and back up and say, do we want to be right, especially from an academic perspective? Do we want to be right, or do we want to fix it?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I personally now, yeah, I would love to be right, but that's icing on the cake. I want it to be better. I want it to be fixed. I want people to be treated with kindness and not with niceness. There are things that I want that supersede the words, the language, the data. Are we right and someone else is wrong? I just want it fixed. I want people to be good to each
Yeah.
other.
Yeah, and so I do think there's been this shift to what I mean
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't love calling whatever this is woke 2.0, right? Because that has been so wholly
Mm-hmm.
disparaged and rubbed in the mud. So kind of detached from its original origin that it just feels empty. But I think
Mm-hmm.
one of the commentators I read about this AOC comment was that she, when she first came on the scene, she was loud and she said, "Here's my agenda, and I'm gonna do what I can, Green New Deal."
Mm-hmm.
And as she's evolved as a congressperson and perhaps has higher aspirations, she has begun to demonstrate or articulate those same values, but differently, right? Like, so more pragmatically, more strategically. And I think that whatever woke
That's
1.0
good.
was, it wasn't very strategic. right? I mean, hindsight is 2020, of course, but
Mhm.
we thought we were at a tipping point, and as you and I have talked about many times, we were not. And
That's right.
we,
That's right.
and that has pres I'm not, it's precipitated where we are now. Like it's not the whole reason, but
Well,
certainly.
and I know it's okay. I know this is a whole other podcast, but I'm just going to drop this here. Maybe we can come back to it at another
Yeah.
time. But I feel like that also was my evolution around lots of things around diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mm,
Yeah, I do want to light these folks up. Yeah, I am pissed off about certain things, and I just want to let them
yeah.
have it. I used to call people that were more strategic. I used to say they're sugarcoating things to just give it to them as it is, so forth and so on. And to what end? Not too much,
Yeah.
right? Now that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that I don't say shocking things or things that make people stop in their tracks to think and so forth. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that with wisdom and time, I always ask the question. It's one of my favorite podcasts that we've ever recorded, Lisa, is are we playing checkers or are we playing
Yeah.
multi-level chess? And
Yeah.
I feel like
Yeah.
you evolve over a time where, yeah, we were
Hmm.
playing checkers at some point, but I'm at the age and stage where I want to play multi-level chess. I
Yeah.
want to be that person that comes in and does the quote unquote HR training that was freaking anti-racism, anti-sexism training, and you didn't even realize it. You sat there and agreed with it the whole time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I got
Yeah.
changed behavior when I get my evaluations back in a year.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I want. And that takes time because, Lisa, we observed that when 47 came back into office, even a little bit before that, when people started becoming very purist and meticulous about language.
Right.
Do you want to dig in your heels about DEI work, or are you willing to shift language in order to continue doing DEI work in real time?
Right.
And there was a bifurcation of folks
There was. There
at that
was.
time as well. So anyway, that may be woke 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, whatever it looks like moving forward. I don't know.
Yeah. I do think it's going to be interesting to watch, particularly how the Democratic Party moves into the 2028 presidential election and with all of this.
Oh
So,
yes. Mm-hmm.
anyway, lots to come, I
Yep.
imagine.
Yep.
And who
Mm-hmm.
knows?
I know, right? Exactly. Well, I the last thing I'll say about that, Lisa, is that I love that conversation, and it reminds me to continue to check the ongoing privilege that I carry, that you carry, we carry around being highly educated people that want
Hmm.
community and good things around folks. Like, yeah, I want to slice and dice these words all day long and what really matters to people's day-to-day life. I got to
Right.
remind myself of that privilege that I carry, because
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
a good aha moment for folks that may be listening to this podcast that are
Hmm.
extremely highly formally educated, and how we use our education. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, look, that's it. We gave y'all a lot. Okay. We gave you a lot to think about. We even gave them homework, Lisa. Listen to that. We gave them homework to go
Well,
back.
you gave them homework. I'm not
Nice.
having any part of that.
As if we don't have enough work to already do. Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah,
know.
exactly. So, but yes, this is another episode of the Unfazed, Unedited podcast. Please make sure that you reach out to us through all of your social media and favorite podcast apps at Unfazed, Unedited. Email us at info@unfazedpodcast.com, or just go to our website, unfazedpodcast.com, where you can access both the old and the new shows. All right, including that
Hmm.
this episode we told you about, episode 139, Wake Up, Stay Woke. All right. So if you like this week's episode, please subscribe, download, leave a review, share with your friends, coworkers, or others in this phase of your life. So, Dr. Lisa, until next week.
All right. See you next week.